Hello everyone and welcome to another amazing furniture flip. My name is Samuel with Cedar Pine Designs, and in today's video I will be restoring this mid-century style desk while adding a bit of a modern touch to it. So with that said, let's jump straight into this project and get our hands dirty. I start every project off the same way by stripping down, cleaning with a degreaser, and removing all the hardware. I use TSP, which comes in a concentrated formula, so don't forget to dilute with water, then follow up after cleaning your piece with a clean towel and plain water to remove the degreaser or film. I'm flipping this desk on its top in order to remove the legs, as they will be sanded down to bare wood. It also makes it a lot easier for me to work with the top half of this piece, allowing me to easily sand it down and move it around. Once the legs are removed, I lay a mover's blanket down on a table in order to place the desk on top of so that I can sand it down and prep it for stain along with a bit of paint. I plan on giving the hardware a fresh coat of paint as well, so those are being removed and prepped while also giving me access to the face of the drawers, which are being sanded down to natural wood. I had plans to stain the top, but after looking over this desk, I found that the top is made of a thin piece of laminate, so I decided to just give it a quick scuff sanding using 150 grit sandpaper in order to prep it for a few coats of paint. I also decided to paint the small pieces of trim, which is the same thickness of the top, so that it has a bit of symmetry to it while adding a bit of contrast between the painted areas versus the stain. These middle sections along with the drawer fronts are being stripped down to bare wood because I plan on staining those areas, bringing back some of its original wood character. So that I can keep as much bare wood as possible, the legs are also being sanded down to bare wood using 150 grit sandpaper, and the bottom leg caps will also get a fresh coat of paint the same color as the handles of the drawers. For the areas getting stripped down to bare wood, I usually start with a heavy sandpaper around 80 grit, then I work my way through various grits to get a nice smooth finish while removing any scratches the rougher stuff leaves behind. I typically start with an 80 grit to remove all the material, then I move on to 150 grit, and then I finally finish off with 220 grit. The inside of the drawer showed clear signs of wear and stains, so I sanded away the bit of finish that was on it and scratches, and will be staining those areas as well. It also looks better when you open the drawers and all the wood surfaces are consistently the same color. These small inside grooves proved to be the toughest part of this project due to the tedious hand sanding it required and how many there actually were. But with a bit of elbow grease, I finally got the old paint out and can move on to getting these drawers stained. Although it's not always required, I like to use a wood stain conditioner so that I can avoid any blotching or discoloration in the wood. Once it's applied, you can move right into staining, but be mindful not to let it dry completely, as the wood will no longer soak in stain and will have to be sanded back down in order to repeat the process. I'm using the color Red Mahogany, which is an oil-based stain made by Behr. Depending on how rich or dark you want the color to be, you can add multiple coats, letting each application dry for a few hours in between until you reach the desired look. After, you want to let it dry for a minimum of 24 hours before you try sealing it or covering it up like I do so that I can paint. Be sure to wear a mask or a respirator while using stain, and make sure that you work in a very well ventilated area and store any used rags in an isolated area until they dry before disposing of them or washing them and reusing them like I do. After the stain has had about 24 hours to dry, I mask off all the wood surfaces in order to protect my work while I get ready to start laying down some paint. I use some painter's pyramids to elevate the desk just enough so that the desk is off the table and I can paint without it sticking to the surface of my moving blanket. I always recommend using these disposable paint filters in order to protect your spray gun as well as the finish of your paint. I'm using a gray paint that I had for a while. It has a satin finish built into it, and as you can see, there's a lot of separation in the paint and it almost looks unusable. But this is typical for paint that sits for a long time, and it just needs a really good mixing to get it back to a usable state. Once it's nice and mixed up, I pour the paint into a measuring cup and add water in order to thin it enough so that it flows through my HVLP spray gun. Trying to use paint alone without water in a spray gun like mine will cause it to have very poor material flow and come out like a very fine mist. I never show it or film it, but before I start to paint my piece, I like to use a piece of cardboard to test the spray gun for material flow and spray pattern, ensuring that the gun isn't clogged and that the paint mixture with water is correct. I like to apply around 3 to 4 coats when not using a primer, just to make sure that I get very nice coverage and no wood bleed through where it has been sanded past the finish, exposing the raw wood. Between each coat of paint, I'll scuff sand to create a strong bond using 220 grit sandpaper. But for the coat just before my final layer, I like to use 400 grit sandpaper, being careful not to leave behind any scratches that can show through the paint. HVLP spray guns apply very fine, thin layers in order to achieve a very smooth surface, but that can also show imperfections during the sanding process, which is why I like to use a higher grit sandpaper at the end. While I wait for the paint to dry, I move over to the leg caps and the drawer handles. I will be giving them a fresh coat of pure gold paint made by Rust-Oleum, but be sure to use light coats and try not to achieve full coverage or thick coats, as this paint has a tendency to build up and run fairly quickly. After laying a few coats of paint down, I decided I wanted the gray to be a bit darker, so I resort to my favorite trick of adding black paint to create a darker tone of whatever paint I'm using, and for me, it works every time because it allows me to manipulate the paint and get it to my liking. Since I already used the paint to lay a couple of coats down, I'll do around 2 more coats of the darker tone just to make sure that none of the lighter tone comes through. Now that I have my paint taken care of, I remove all the masking tape to reveal the very nice stained wood as I prepare to top coat this desk with a few coats of poly. For my top coat, I really like to use this water-based polyurethane in a satin finish made by Behr. I use water-based because it dries super fast, especially in warmer weather, that way I can get more coats in throughout the day. And disposable filters are a life and time saver, so don't forget to use these when adding paint or top coat to your spray gun. I'll do 2 to 3 coats and very lightly sand in between each coat with 400 grit sandpaper just to knock down any bumps or dust that may have gotten into the finish when drying. When scuff sanding your paint or top coat, do be careful not to catch the edges, as this can remove the paint, causing you to have to recoat or use more top coat than is needed. If you have a sanding block, that is a very safe way of avoiding this mistake. For my final coat, I like to lay it on a little thicker so that I get a nice durable finish, adding life to the piece, but try not to let the poly build up around any of the edges or the sides to avoid runs or buildup that will then have to be sanded down. Now it's time to reinstall the freshly painted hardware, that way we can seal the inside of the drawers with furniture wax. I'm using Johnson's paste wax to seal the sides, bottom, and inside of the drawers. Per the instructions, you rub into the wood using a brush or cloth, letting it dry to a haze before using a rag to remove any excess wax. This isn't my favorite wax due to it not being scented, but it does bring out the color of the wood and stain. The last few steps before the big reveal is to get those legs back on and reinstall the drawers after letting the wax dry for a little bit longer. Before we see what it looks like in its finished form, let's take a look back at how it started before it undergone its transformation. I'd like to thank everyone who made it with me to the end of this project. It definitely was a very fun desk to work on, and as usual, let's talk about what I have into this piece. So I found this desk on Facebook Marketplace and I picked it up for $30. The paint, stain, and top coat I already had from previous pieces, so I'll go ahead and throw $20 in for that, bringing my total up to $50. I posted it for $350 and I had a bit of interest, but have yet to sell this one. So I'll go ahead and post in my next video in the description if I do sell it and how much I sold it for. Once again, thank you all for the support and positive feedback I've been receiving. Making these videos definitely does add to the fun of flipping furniture, and with that said, I can't wait to see you all on my next project. Take care.